So we have an update from the client. We sent 3 strong concepts to them and we crossed our fingers, and we were definitely nervous about how they would respond. And the whole time through this client, I actually have somebody else that's the client, that's a business partner of mine, and he's acting as the client, and he's doing it based on a client situation, a real client situation I had a few years ago. So he's kind of acting in the same interest to try to make this class project as realistic as possible. So it's not me saying, oh, the client picked this. It was someone else who had some opinions and trying to make this as realistic as possible. So what they determined is they liked this one the best. It was probably the more simplified version of all of them. They loved the seal idea, but they were just afraid of how does that seal adapt to digital stuff. They're going to have an online ordering app, all these kind of things, and they just didn't see it as a very flexible logo for the seal. And for the other concept, they thought it was really trendy. They thought it was really neat from a design perspective, but it didn't feel like it really connected with him personally. So he's the owner of the company, or the pretend owner of the company in this case, and this is the one they decided to go with, and I'm happy with that. It's not my personal favorite pick. Most of the time, the client will not pick your favorite, and there's a lot of great reasons why. We get really into our designs, and sometimes we lose perspective, and we forget that it's about what the client needs and connects with, not what we think is the best. But the great thing about this is save all of your declined, denied, unused concepts, because you could end up using some of these elements for another client project later down the road. I've done that many times, where maybe they didn't like the knife, but I happened to need a knife for some other type of little illustration, and you can adapt it. It's all yours. You're the one who created it. So now we're going to spend a while. We were not perfectionists before. We were really brainstorming and coming up with some general ideas for the client. Now we need to be perfectionists because we need to get a logo ready. And the logo will be the basis of our brand, and everything will build around that. We're going to be coming up with typography systems, color systems, photo systems, all these different systems that's going to help us build our branding standards manual. But right now we need to perfect this. We need to put this on a grid. We need to find out the spacing between all the elements so that we can start to maintain and get a logo system going. The end game for all of this will be to develop an incredibly flexible logo system. This is what a logo system looks like. You could see horizontal and vertical presentations as well as square. You can also see mobile application usage as well, so really tiny icons. How can we take our full logo with the tagline and reduce it down without the tagline? How do we reduce it down to just the typography? How do we reduce it down just to an icon? And finally, how do we reduce it down to something that could fit on an app icon or anything like that? We also want to find out alternative presentations of the logo. So will the logo exist on top of a circle, for example, so it can easily be put on packages for delivery? Will we need to have a different version that's really skinny and vertical? So once again, we could put it as a sticker on top of bags or on the menu or all sorts of different things. It's going to be really nice to have options, because with this logo, it's great, but what if we want to put it on a chopstick wrapper? We need to have a logo that can fit on narrow spaces, wide spaces, tall spaces, small spaces, large spaces, different spaces, on busy backgrounds, on simple backgrounds. So we need to develop this entire system so the logo can be used anywhere. So let's get started developing our logo system. We're going to perfect our original logo presentation right here. We're going to perfect that by putting it on the grid, and then we'll keep going and reducing that logo down further and further. So on the left is where we last left off. This is what we came up with. We didn't fine tune any of the details yet. We haven't put it on a grid yet. We haven't perfected it yet. The one on the right is where we're going to end up. You can see the differences of the size of the icon and the size of the typography. They seem more matched on the right, and that's something that is part of this process we're getting ready to go through. How do we size the logo mark and the logo type together. Also, any kind of sharp edges and tiny little things when I zoom in. Am I happy with the sharp edges of the S? Am I happy with how this is curving? We are going to zoom in 800% and really perfect all the edges. Also, the difference between the spacing here. So you have some spacing between the logo mark and the logo type. And there's also spacing between the logo main company name and the tagline. Well, let's determine that spacing. There's a grid system and a spacing system we can set up to determine and help us determine how much space can be there between all those different type and symbol elements. Let's get started making this logo as perfect as we can. So one thing when you zoom in, let's zoom in and take a look. What you want to do is you want to have consistency with your edges. So if these are sharp and these are round, those aren't very consistent. So I just want to add some subtle roundness to all of these elements. So what I'm going to do, because I'm getting ready to create outlines on all of this typography, so I'm going to right click, I'm creating outlines, so that will give me a chance to go in and modify this a little bit. So let's get our direct selection tool. I would just want to do very small corners. And you notice up here on corners, you'll see a radius. So this is how much it's curving. So I can increase the radius and make it really almost like a pill shape, or I can go back to how I had it, which is 0.0077 inches. I'm in inches, so you might be in centimeters or another type of measurement. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that number. And if I want the C to be the same radius, I can simply get my direct selection tool, go over here to my corners. I can paste that in there and I have matching radiuses. Let me go ahead and paste that in there after I did all of those. And same thing with our logo. We want everything to be consistent. Just click once and drag, it'll do all of them for you, and then I can go back up here and paste that in. So they can all be, so that S right there is the same radius or angle. We can also ungroup these and think about spacing between sushi and club, and think about all the spacing between all these little elements. And so let me do one more thing really quickly. Let me just kind of soften. This one will be much softer of a radius, just barely. Just kind of cleans it up, makes it just seem more polished. There is probably something I can do to fix the curvature there. Let me get the curvature tool, see if I can't get a better unifying looking. And also the sushi needs to be fixed. Let me make sure I've outlined the path on here. Outline any paths you have. So outline stroke and see if I can't combine those elements together, or if I can get the direct selection tool. Just want to make sure everything has a smooth edge. So moving over here, smooth edge. And if things are the light color like this, you want to see if you can't combine these two different, these are two different, this is a circle and that's kind of a shape below it. If I can't select both and try to see if I can't combine elements to simplify them. So instead of having two overlapping elements, I now have just one, and that'll make life a lot easier for you later down the road. But how do we feel about the spacing between the characters? So we have this automatic tracking here. Do we want to reduce the tracking and close the spacing? Or do we want to keep it at the default 0? Or we can manually do the tracking by isolating each letter and changing the spacing between each letter. That's called kerning. We can kern this manually too. So there's a lot of different options. I like it a little tighter in spacing. So I wonder if I tighten it just a little bit, maybe a -10 or a -25. I think that looks really a little more cohesive. Are we happy with the weight? We have a lot of weight options: regular, medium, semi-bold. And it makes me wonder if medium, semi-bold, I think we would have a problem if I did a visibility test on this that is really thin. It wouldn't hurt to increase to semi-bold. It really would not hurt in this case because it looks much stronger as a semi-bold. And sizing. How do we think about the size compared to Sushi Club? If I were to make this much smaller, and tuck it underneath. You lose it and it seems like an afterthought, or looks like a small print. So we can't have it be too small. If I make it bigger than the one below, it starts to fight for Sushi Club, and we don't want we want authentically prepared to remain a tagline. So I think in terms of sizing, I think that was probably the Goldilocks, right there in the middle size. Not too big, not too small. And we can manually kern these now that we created outlines and we right-clicked and we ungrouped these. These are all separate characters now. So we can go back in and find out, is there any kind of manual kerning we need to do to find kind of some really good consistent spacing. So if I were to make this a really bright color and make it a stroke, and you can see how the S is in the way, or kind of starts to encroach on this little space. So if everything were to have the same spacing, it doesn't look like it is. But because of the weight of each character, so an H is a really balanced character. It has the symmetry. So the H is symmetry. So it's easy to put symmetrical letters with the same spacing between them that looks correct. But when you have letters that are not symmetrical, so if you were to draw a line, unfortunately we don't have a lot of asymmetrical characters. An L, if I were to draw a line right down the L, it is way more left heavy than it is right heavy. And so you have to be careful when you have a left heavy. So this is left heavy and this has nothing here. And so if I were to put the same exact spacing to the left and right, it would have that left heaviness. So when you manually kern typography, you're helping to balance that awkwardness of asymmetrical letters. So if I were to put the same distance here, so this would be a very small tweak. Perhaps nudging this very slightly to the left could help. It doesn't have to match perfectly this way, because then you're going to start getting that awkwardness. So this is where doing some optical adjustments really help. So optical adjustments is, how does it look and feel to your eye? It's a little bit less technical. Okay, I'm moving it over 10 pixels. It's a little bit more how it looks. And this is sometimes has to be done because characters are not all symmetrical. The computer's not going to be able to align this perfectly for you. So it's nice to kind of see your spacing, because sometimes the default spacing does a pretty good job. But with this whole, I think this is a different type weight. So what we want to do here is kind of have consistent spacing from the left word sushi to the right word. So maybe this needs some adjustment. And this is where kerning comes into play. So remember, our L was an asymmetrical left heavy character. So that may mean instead of having the same spacing with the C and L, having the same spacing between the L and the U, perhaps I might need to over adjust and bring this U over a little bit to make up for that kind of gap you have in this asymmetrical letter. So the spacing might even be more narrow. So let's take this default. This is asymmetrical letters here. Well, B is not symmetrical. It's very left heavy, but it's also very balanced on the right. So it's not like one, it's not like an L. That's totally unbalanced. But this has weight on the right, similar to the left. So now there's similar spacing between these characters. And you can kind of see that here, that asymmetrical, it's just such a gap here. And it makes me want to move that closer in. See if I can't bring both of these letters over just a hair to make up for that awkward gap. So now this feels more tucked into the L and making up for that gap. See, these are really, really small details, very, very small details. And also making sure everything has the same X height and cap height. So this is your cap height where your capital letters go across the top. I want to make sure that is consistent, and it is. And also your bottom, sure that is consistent. So that looks really good.